Death visits us on a daily basis as black males. And so I'm left with two words in my head: absolutely disgraceful. At the gym 2 days ago, late on in the day, I need to tell you the story just to outline, give you a summary of what's going on, to deconstruct it afterwards. But I'm at the gym all the time. We know that you can, or we continue until the last minute and then we leave. Well, I'm not going to tell you this story, actually. Maybe I should do that, is to explain the position of us black males in this society, or at least the experiences that we have are subjected to, the violence that we endure, that is normalized, and the mechanisms that people use to actually subject us to this degradation and death. These procedures and protocols which ensure that we are always insulted and violated, and that there's very little that happens with rectifying remedy in the situation, never mind even find a means of responding to it meaningfully, because people violate us and do what they want with our bodies, and there's no retribution, anything like that. It's just whatever they will, whatever they desire to do to us, they can. And so it reminds me of that Tommy Curry question, one of the theorists that I drew upon. If a black male is sodomized by a white male, is that racial violence or sexual violence? And then given the fact of our blackness always being seen as some type of fetish almost, at what point are we outside the context of sexualization, or whatever that word even means, when our interaction with us not predominantly, if not primarily, guided by a sexual dynamic, and then the idea of our skin being construed as a weapon, begging the question of when are we ever construed as being unarmed? So we have the violence sex aspects that dominate most of the interactions with us. That's what I want to analyze in this short story, as it were. So I'm at the gym and it's 1:45. Now about to begin a set on the Smith machine. Now the ladies already moved the box to the side, and that's fine for me at least, so I'll bring it back and I'm doing something on it. No, actually, I might be wrong. I believe I actually brought the box to the machine and then I walked around to do something, and the lady went and brought it back. So I went and got the box that I was going to use for lunging and brought it back to the machine. Then the lady approached me and says, "Oh, we're finished," and gestures in a way, and went and took the box and brought it back. So I just overlooked that and took it, brought it back and continued my thing. Now she comes up to me and it's like, "Oh, we're finished. Can't you hear? We're finished." Blah, blah, blah. Again, this is just recounting from memory, so it's very difficult with how things get distorted and the like, especially when you have to follow procedures and protocols. Well, now, I'm like to her, "Why don't you go tell those people over there? Why don't you tell those people? Why don't you tell those people over there?" And I just started cussing because I'm livid the fact that you would approach me in such a manly and masculine way, stepping to me. Never mind the fact you're staff, never mind the fact you work there, what have you, the fact you would approach me in this way, this insulting, this disrespectful way, this violation as it were, and think nothing of it. No concept of courtesy, anything like that. Just the fact you could actually approach anyone like that and think it's ordinary, assume it's normal, and expect that to be a standard or code of behaviour that you think others could aspire towards. So I was rude back to her, equally, definitely raised my voice and the like, and started to just ignore her in the end. I mean, you can never really paint the whole picture of these things. That's why I like cameras and the like, so people don't just invent stuff after the fact. Then she walked away. Then she comes back with her, I don't know who this other woman is, well, so that shows the discourtesy anyway. the fact you would just come down and not even introduce yourself or anything like that. But she comes down and it's like, why were you rude to her? She was just saying this. I'm like, have you even bothered to get both parts of the story? Why are you accusing me of something? She's like, well, no, I'm going to get your part of the story. And I'm like, well, you've already started in the wrong way because you've already taken it on board. And then she goes into this, she was just explaining. So I'm like, how are you telling me what happened when you weren't even there? And so I started cussing them myself. And then they were like, well, okay, we'll just remove your membership if you're going to be rude to us. We'll just wipe you off this. I'm like, go on then, do it. And then they kept talking. So I was actually getting my phone to start recording them and filming them on this savage, brutal, beast, niggerish behaviour, you might as well call it. Then they walked away. I don't think they realised what I was doing. Then afterwards, I was speaking to one of the personal trainers who works there. And this is where the story gets interesting. I was like to him, you know what? I really want to get your collie suspended. Then he said to me, it won't happen. This is where the story actually takes off. This is the TED Talk. He said to me, basically, you're both in the wrong. She had no business being a woman approaching you like a man, stepping to you like a man. And that's the part when I actually realised what she did to provoke me and trigger the whole situation. Because, you know, sometimes people do you wrong. You don't know what it is, but you know you've done wrong. And you just respond to it without fully comprehending what you're responding to. So he's saying she did that, but at the same time, you have no business threatening her. So I'm like, what do you mean threaten her? And he was like, what did you say? I said, I said my thing in yard. We just speak like that. I'm sure you're from yard. I'm sure you understand. We just cuss when we're upset. And people say, you know, foolishness to us. We just cuss. Then he said the interesting thing, which is interesting in terms of his perception, is like, the second you raise your voice, it's perceived as threatening. So now she could go back and say you've been aggressive and threatening. And he points at his skin and says, no matter what, they're always going to see this as aggressive and loud and the like. And I'm like, wow, now this story is really taking off. Because now I'm processing it. And it's funny, because just the other day, my cousin uploaded a thing about don't create situations and then afterwards try and manipulate it to present yourself as the victim. But this is totally what this lady did. She starts something, she provokes a situation by coming up and insulting a quote-unquote customer. Then afterwards, she rushes back. Think about scriptures. I forgot the name of the first books, the first 5 books where they look about codes that you follow. But after starting this situation, she now runs off and not only plays victim, but she gets on to collaborate and collude with her. And now I don't know if this dynamic was because there was something in these being non-white females or possibly black females who were looking at me with a degree of contempt, or if it was just the fact that they were female, or if it was just the fact that I was a black man, or if it was just the fact they were in professional positions, or the fact one was a manager. There's so many dynamics we can hardly comprehend in this situation. Either way, there was this violation that takes place. She runs back and speaks to this woman. And here's the other thing. This other woman who, let's assume she was a superior. Now, this first member of staff I've spoken to has either manipulated the situation, the whole psychopathy or political chronology thing. She's either manipulated it and told the woman there, oh, blah, 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 he's done this, he's raised his voice, he's threatening, angry and aggressive and rude and disrespectful. Or she's gone up and presented the story in such a way as to think, oh my gosh, she got such rude customers here, you know, I can't believe it, etc., etc. Either way, this person who is stupid, I should say, and disrespectful further, because if we were living in a regime of justice, or forget that, just properness and correctness, what they would do is initiate a proper procedure and investigation, you know, stuff that never happens under our system of global terror, right, terror domination. But that will be a correct way to go about things, or to come down and ask stuff. Not come down with the person who you have heard gossip now, and this is what happens when we go gossip, rumour and hearsay. We cause problems because there's an inherent bias. But don't come by with this, what do they call them? Belligerent, I believe the word is. Complainant. And then pretend that you're doing some neutral investigation. Because this then was the major problem of the situation, the dynamics of this. Now we have 2 people who work here who are obviously going to do the, obviously, new word, the police thing. or function as destructive people, or function as we experience them, the supremacists, or I don't really like that word, but function as professionals is the best way I could put it, as terms like why it can confuse this particular situation. But you know the whole police thing where they always pretend they're neutral, impartial observers and corroborate each other's story no matter what happens. That's what they're doing, using this structural positionality that they have, their power to impose a narrative on a situation, which ultimately is to my detriment, despite the fact that I'm a customer. So they're employed, I'm a customer, but in this dynamic now, I'm the degraded flesh. I am seen as the man, not. I'm suddenly transformed to subject, and they're transformed to superiors. So forget the fact that in business, meant to be customer is seen as someone who's still worthy and the like. That's how it's read anyway, or how I've interpreted it, as suddenly a non-person, because they're using their power to perform violence structurally, and they're ultimately also using the mechanisms of protection that are built into the system and regime. So now they know they're doing wrong, but they can hide it, they can disguise it, they're concealed, and they're protected in the violence that they're doing. So they can do wrong and then pretend they're innocent. Sound familiar, isn't it? What's the fact that they could do this and yet live with these contradictions, knowing what they're doing, and if not knowing, irrespective of doing it? That was the part that has just traumatized me, because when I was speaking to the PT afterwards, he was like, the bottom line is they will go to head office. So I was like, I'll complain to head office. And that's where it also struck me, because I was thinking the level I was complain to head office, thinking in terms of discrimination, harassment, bullying. And then I remembered all my life, these terms mean nothing, because we live in a system of violence where the very law we hope will protect us is guilty of the very crimes it purports or claims it wishes to punish. And so these terms are examples of us trying to take on the legal language narratives in a way to get identity or be recognized as having a status, something they could respond to. And really, if I use these terms like bullying, discrimination, the language they've given to us, their registrar, which is meaningless, it's inconsequential, because power doesn't work like that. There's truth and right, correctness, and then there's power, and power is ultimately what decides and determines truth. So irrespective of my position, what they will ultimately side with, he explained and I concurred or agreed, is that these women work for Fitness First, said the organisation, and working for it, they will always side with their colleagues. And likewise, you'll find the same with the police. No matter what the police do, these people work for London Metropolitan Police, and so we will side with them. And all the while, whilst they've already decided they will side with them, they will lie, they will purport, distort, and claim we are carrying out an independent investigation, knowing very well what they are going to do ahead of time. So irrespective of this fake independent investigation, at the end they will write the same thing. Oh, we've investigated and we found that you were, no, they start off, despite our colleagues not acting in the most professional manner, we found and decided that you were definitely in the wrong, you were violent and aggressive, we cannot tolerate this behaviour as it means people will be unsafe, and therefore we would like to terminate your custom, etc, etc. It just reminded me of the hyper vulnerability of black males under this regime of domination and degradation, global white terror domination as it were, white being Cold War or professional, and the varying levels of that. Again, white is complex because there's the Barno-Hess thing where you have to break it down into the multiple layers. Hope the story is making sense and you could follow her, because if I had to use names and that, it might make it easier, but I'm not sure. This is my first time doing this. So it was just very troubling, the fact that this situation could have just been created by the fact that I was seen as some non-entity and something worthy of being disregarded or disrespected, and that was seen as normal. That was one of the things that really got to me. And then hear the second part now, because after listening to the PT, I was like, so what, I'm to apologise for that disrespect? And he said, well, I'm not saying apologise and all of that. I'm not saying I'm not going to go do the supplicant thing. I was just going to explain my side of things. But he was saying, if it goes head office, you're not going to win. And I've seen cases like that where, despite knowing the truth, because they have the power, they win. And that's how the system's structured. That's why I always say it's a paedophile system. And then when you're a black male, you're at the bottom of that hierarchy. Probably now they have entities like transgenderism that are even way above you in this hierarchy. But it was funny because despite these talks about patriarchy, male violence, male domination, the fact of the matter is this female was empowered here, despite, talk about, oh, the system oppresses us all as non-white people. This female could easily have played out, and I saw it in my head. What she has to do now, her and her manager, or whoever this lady was, the superior, or just some other woman who just involved herself, is, oh, he was aggressive. I felt so threatened. I was unsafe. And women, I'm sure, if not know what impact they can have upon others, they do it anyway. So this is not, it's not privilege, it's power to distort any situation. Because as a female, she will always be coded as victim and vulnerable, and the male would always be coded as aggressive and violent or threatening, irrespective. So it was not just the fact that it was professional and non-professional, worker and non-worker, but it was also that dynamic of gender, that the black male is always the animal or just above an animal, and the female is always just below an angel. That was the other dynamic they were also ready to exploit. I just thought about the fact that it was impossible for me to find any justice or some type of retribution or equity in this situation, and yet these provocations and insults that create so much distortion in our personality, so much rage almost, all these violences, these violations, this violence we're subject to as black males, there's nowhere we can go to remedy it. And at the same time, we're subjected to this violence. We're told that we're the victimizers. At the same time as we're being victimized, we're told that we are the sole exclusive authorities of violence, that we do and impose our will upon all these people, that we are the most meanest, vilest creatures. And it's not even illogical. It's like a massive lie, and everyone knows. Either they know it's a lie, or they're so entitled, conceited, and necessarily needing to delude and deceive themselves that they can't afford to see what is so remarkably obvious to us as black males, that we are just so openly prone to violence, as Tommy Curry and Frank Wilderson speak about. And yet there's no space to even articulate this narrative, because it's suffocated, it's drowned out by the whole talk about, oh, black male's such a major problem. And we don't even have these conceptual frameworks, these cognitive perspectives to talk about and articulate the pain that we endure. There's no one we can speak to. No one. There's no voice for us or anything like that. We are silenced, marginalized, and socially dead is the best way to put it. Dead. I'm a nobody in this situation, irrespective. My voice is discardable for anything that holds Rain Books, testimony, injustice, or epistemic insult. That's what they said, a black man has no rights, which a white man is bound to respect. Yeah, I have no knowledge which can contribute to the situation, so I don't need to be consulted prior to a decision being made. If there was some quote-unquote investigation, which never works anyway, because the Anthony Farley article, Perfecting Slavery, where it's explained that even appealing to legal remedies, systems of domination, is a failed adventure, because they were also designed to ensure that we are degraded. That's why I like that article that Charles Mills was writing on white supremacy. Again, that's the presupposition here, the major premise that we live in a regime of white supremacy, and Charles Mills is a great guide for that, because the system is structured to bias and commit violence against us as black males and stress us out, and that's the real thing about it. It's warfare waged daily to end our lives, but slowly is to keep us in a captivity. I mean, in war, you either kill them or you take them hostage, prisoner, captive, and we're held captive and drained of all our life force, our resources, I mean, it would actually be better if they actually killed more of us black males, because then we could see the damage. But as Asa Hilliard says, violence occurs in all different ways, and we think it's subtle. It's not subtle. We just think of it because we have such a limited framework of violence. Just where we have this limited framework of victimhood, so we can't appreciate other stuff. It's like when people say, "Oh, racism is subtle, now it's hidden." No, it's not. It's still the same thing. It's just you have such a limited spectrum, you can't call something what it is. So we kind of flatter ourselves and say, oh, it's different now. It's not different. It's just your perception of what's happening. It's so inane, but now you can't comprehend the magnitude of what's even happening. So in a way, you don't even experience your experiences. And that's why we have to deal with this black males, because there's no one we can even turn to. I mean, this was another black male, the personal trainer, who actually gave me a slight insight. Otherwise, I would have repeated the same mistakes. But had it not been for someone like that to make an intervention, to guide, almost show you through the situation, there's nothing for us. There's no organizations that are going to say, oh, how do we protect black males against this violence we're there to deal with? And that was the joke of the situation. Had this been, quote unquote, on road or in the streets, this lady would have probably got box in her mouth. I don't think there's anyone, I don't think she would even try to speak to someone like that in any parallel or similar situation. What's in this quote unquote professional setting, business setting, so it's like, oh, I could exploit the situation. I can ultimately use my power to dominate the perspective and landscape and influence people. That was the biggest joke of it. And as black males, we don't even have any means of doing anything to protect ourselves to begin with. I mean, how would I have had some respect or recognition of stand in that situation? What, being a lawyer? And it's like, how would we even become lawyers? What, going through a set old boys network or firm or structure that denies us personhood anyway, which takes us through the degrees and then doesn't even give us these LPCs or training contracts or other types of experiences. You know, where do we even get standing? Nothing. There's no, or so little mobility that we have. And then as you saw with the Colin Kaepernick thing or Jeff Schmidt, disciplined minds, when we try to challenge these regimes and structures, when we're not politically subordinate, we're silenced. We're degraded, we're suffocated, we're drowned out. And so we constantly live with this social death, as it were. We know we're socially dead because we can't get in and we can't get out. We can't rise up from this graveyard, these reservations that we live in as degraded black bodies, where we're only ever called upon to serve as a canvas upon which others can act out their desires. We are the anti-ethical peoples of this world, and that's why I think it's important to start looking at these masculinist perspectives and really start to ask, so, you know, concretely, materially, what does it mean to be males? What does it mean to be black males? And if others aren't beholden to any codes of conduct or behaviour around us, and if we're not only that, we're groomed to hold ourselves to these codes and standards which others don't hold us to, what does it mean for these codes? What does it mean for identity? Why do we get controlled and dominated by shame and guilt so much when other people don't even follow these standards they love to impose upon us? That's the question that we're trying to ask here. What does it mean for manhood? And that's what I was thinking about, to challenge all of these customs. If we're not going to be met with any modicum of civility or decency, and we know we're not, we know it's this anti-blackness which structures our lives and dictates and determines how other people are going to relate to us, then we need to, perhaps as black males, consider throwing away these codes ourselves, breaking away from this silly morality and ethics. That's why I say even grooming. We always talk about, oh, male grooming and the like, when really I saw something. I think Argenta, some lady in the Me Too movement, who had admitted having sex with a 16-year-old boy who, because of the laws, was underage. And then I saw that thing on To Catch a Predator when this, I think he was 34, he was trying to have sex with a 16-year-old. And the Argenta thing, whatever her name is, there's like no outrage for that, is there? With a 16-year-old boy, it's like, I mean, the 34-year-old and a 16-year-old boy, no, 16-year-old girl, it's like, oh, she's vulnerable, she's a victim, and she's an angel. Let's all be disgusted. And that's thought about it. That's how males are groomed to value female life much higher than it does male life. That's why if a man hits a woman, it's like, that's awful. And males would intervene. No matter what she's done, they just assume it's wrong. They just intervene. Because that's the training, that's the power that these apparently helpless powerless females have over men, which was compared to you having to deal with someone who claims hasn't got a gun when they're really hiding the gun in their pants. That's the power they have. Yeah, us males are groomed to see this absurd, extraordinary situation as something normal and mundane. I'm not really encouraged to challenge female power, unless we're reading books like Esther Villa, The Manipulating Man, Shinri's Anatomy of Female Power, Matthew Fitzgerald's Sexploitation, How Females Use Their Bodies to Exploit Men, or Jack Hammer, or even Simon Shepherd, and all these books which need to be mandatory reading for us as males if we to even imagine, conceive, conceptualize ourselves as having a valid position, because we do. What we are, as it were, the invisibilized people. We are the ignored gender, as I think Paul Leland says, or Man Woman Myth, or even Tom Likas points to similar things. There's so many people. Jordan Peterson seems to be one of the new breeds, as it were, but there's so many people are talking to these issues, and men, just as black people, need to theorize ourselves as black. And Chris Wilson always spoke about that code, the black codes, as well. Neely Fuller spoke about that. Men generally need to see ourselves as having these issues, as being so openly vulnerable. I mean, we hear stuff about toxic masculinity and the like, and it's almost like a cheat code. It hacks into the male brain computer, as it were, because we're so busy being determined by guilt and shame, looking for female approval, probably programming that's installed in us by our mothers. It's like we don't get a second to analyse the absurdity of what's being said. I mean, I saw the bell hooks thing, I saw why every man should be a feminist, and, you know, I was waiting for something to hit me like, aha, abracadabra. I was like, well, what you're saying is such a weak argument. I could use the very same pointers or evidence which you're putting forward to arrive at a completely different conclusion. So, this is what I mean. There's a silencing of males to the point of males aren't even considered. It's precluded prior to any discussion, which made me think back to Frank Roderson's thing on coerced speech. Before us black people even contemplate what we're going to say, we have to interrogate the very contemplation itself. There's so many things that we have to think through in order just to say what comes to us first. All these considerations, hence, during that MSNBC talk with Kamathi Carr, one of the appointed people said, as black people, we speak two languages, them and us, because we have to ultimately process the thoughts of those in power prior to even using our own. And that's why as well, it reminds me of that essay on niggers and squirrels. I think it's McGrath, I'm probably mistaken, where they asked, this father is having a conversation and exploring the possibility of telling their son the fact that their son will be so vulnerable. The father says, no, I can't tell them this, but imagine now if males, we got briefed. Imagine if males, we got educated on this, taught this stuff about our vulnerability. A situation like this gym would never arise, because we would have a needy, full of preordained code to respond if these situations did ever arise. But there's very little in the way of educating us males, as it were, on some type of institutions. I mean, the manosphere, or even red pill, black pill revelations are useful, and it's interesting to see where these challenges and critiques of gynocentrism are going to go. But it's nice to have an idea, a concept of gynocentrism to begin with, but what's needed just as importantly, I think Tommy Carr was getting at this, is the idea of black male vulnerability, not just black pain, but the specificity that we have to deal with. So these are just some of my thoughts. There's so much more. I could go on to Jonathan Metzl's protest psychosis, Agnes Richter, Agnes's jacket, how people are silenced, Thomas Sars on the slave, the sane slave. But I think I'll park this here. This is just me being vulnerable, trying to open up with some of my experiences and facilitate learning, the thing that other people can use. So I want to produce a few more of these, but it's nice to finally start some type of blog or podcast again. Did them on archive.org. And yeah, this will if it keeps going, it would improve. So, as I should have said at the start, prepare to be offended. Signing out. And yes, thank you for listening. Guidance.